Welcome, Wildcats, to the election of 1824. At the end of this lesson, you're going to be able to understand what made this election so unusual. You're going to go through the era of good feelings, learn what suffrage is, and find out more information about a contingent election. And might it happen again? So buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, keep your hands inside the car and get ready for this wild ride we know as the election of 1824. So, you think the 2020 election was wild? Accusations and plots and plans and all sorts of stuff? Well, it was. However, it wasn't the first. The first was in 1824, and it was the first crazy election of many. But this was also a very unusual, crazy election. The first part of what makes this election unusual is that we are in what is known as the era of good feelings. It was a period in our country when there was only one political party. The only other time that happened was at the very beginning when George Washington was elected. There weren't any political parties at the time. But very quickly, you developed two differing views of government. One, which was the Federalists, who thought that the national government, the federal government, should have the most strength. And you had Republicans, or state rights party, which thought that the states should be the ones who held the most power. Well, over time, in about 1814, both of those parties had run their course, and they ended up merging into one party called the Democrat Republicans. James Monroe, our fifth president, was the first president elected under this, and he would also be the first of two. And the main thing that ended the era of good feelings was that we had a massive change over those 10 years where America changed a lot. Now, originally, if you had the right to vote, which is called suffrage, it's actually the privilege to vote, you had to be some sort of property owner, invested in this country. You might own land or a business or be a large farmer. But the idea was that for a person to truly be interested in what was happening with the country, they had to have an interest in the country, such as owning land or business. It didn't matter if you worked for someone, that wasn't a consideration. In fact, working for someone was a huge disqualification in the minds of many, because if you are reliant on that person to pay your wage, you might also be unduly influenced by them to cast your vote. So think about it. If I'm here and saying, hey, Wildcats, you work for me here in this social studies class, and if you want to get a good grade, then I want you to vote for Bob. Nope, I don't want you voting for Tom. Tom's a horrible person, and he cheated me one time, so you want a good grade, you'll vote for Bob. And if you don't vote for Bob, you'll get an F. That doesn't seem very right, does it? No, it doesn't. So that's why the people who were sort of in charge of things thought that being beholden to someone and not economically independent could sway voting, and so they didn't allow it. One of the side benefits to the fact that you could be a property owner was that many women and free Africans were allowed to vote in a bunch of different states. So we actually had a very unbiased suffrage at the time. However, as the expansion of suffrage happened, which coincided with our increase in the expansion west, the ideas changed and no longer became so important to be a landowner or a business person. The right to vote was expanded to basically any white male who was free. And because of that, ironically and also sadly, women and free African men lose suffrage as the democratization of America grows. So we gained more people being allowed to vote, yet it became only white men and not women and other minorities. So you're thinking about being the president in 1824. Well, what do you have to do? Well, the first thing is it helps to be a member of the educated and political classes, going to the right schools, having the right family, being in the right sort of society. You need to be supported by at least one, if not more, state legislatures who actually are the ones who nominate you, especially now that we don't have any parties to nominate a candidate. The state legislatures put forth who they'd like to see as president. It does help in this case to have a famous name like Adams, or to have a newly famous name like Andrew Jackson, our hero from the Battle of New Orleans. Another thing, if you want to be president, is you don't actually campaign yourself. No, campaigning is done for you. You let your friends do the talking. You have newspapers who support you or downplay your opponents. Unlike in the modern era today, where newspapers pretend that they are unbiased and don't have an opinion, back in 1824, the newspapers were actually pretty honest. They said, hey, we are a paper that supports this idea or this campaign, or we're the Republican paper, we're the Democrat paper, we're the paper for Adams, we're the paper for Jackson. They didn't hide who their beliefs were or who they supported. So if you wanted to learn why you should vote for Jackson, you find a paper that supports Jackson. This allowed the candidates to pretend that they are above all of this, that they are some sort of special, superior, and highly untouchable person. Unless you have a really bad temper like Andrew Jackson. But that's a little later in our story. So, are you ready to meet the candidates for 1824? Well, I know you are, but we're going to take a pause right here and stop this video, and we'll start up again in part 2.